what was really interesting is we found that to be true in both psoriasis and more recently in a mouse model of atopic dermatitis.
Welcome to the Learn Skin podcast with me, Dr. Raja.
And me, Dr. Hadar, where we discuss all things skin.
Join us as we delve into the art and science of skin health in today's episode.
Hey, Raja, can you say the thing I told you to tell them?
Of course. We are board-certified dermatologists. This podcast is meant for educational and informational purposes only and is not considered medical advice, nor does it serve as a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. All opinions shared do not express the views of Learn Health, Inc. Let's get to the good stuff.
Hey, Raja, how are you today?
Hadar, I'm doing pretty well, but all this talk about people thinking about Roman empires and whatnot. What about the time of Renaissance? Do you ever think about that in Renaissance people that might be amongst us today?
Oh, yes, for sure. I think you're alluding to our guest today and definitely the very walking definition of a Renaissance man. But before we even get to that, I think we always think about innovation and we think about medicine as one of the foremost places to innovate. But the question is, how do you get that done? And I think today we have a great guest that not only grew up in academia, is now flourishing in private practice and his own entrepreneurism, but really has been a mentor for many folks, including myself, by the way. And so I'm really, really excited for you to introduce our guest today.
Yeah, and maybe we're going to play a little bit of Guess Who here, because I'm going to just go over the CV and let's see if any of you can guess it.
Ooh, I like that.
So nearly 300 publications, 24 issued U.S. patents and numerous international patents. He was also a professor for 25 years at Emory Dermatology, served as the inaugural Thomas Lawley Professorship in Dermatology. And here comes probably the most innovative part. So he's currently at Metroderm, one of Atlanta's largest private practice dermatology groups. But guess what? He's got his own private clinical trials unit and heading up clinical trials there and publishing like crazy still. And the best and most interesting part that we're going to talk about is he's got studies on ant venom. Enough said. So I hope all of you had a chance to guess, but our guest today is Dr. Jack Arbiser. And Jack, welcome to the Learn Skin podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And also thank you for these really kind words.
Yes. And, I'm not even sure where to begin, but, we always like to start with just a bit of advice and learning from your path. And maybe you can describe to us what got you interested in academic career and then what made you change and go into the private sector. Where do you see those differences, if you can compare and contrast for the young and maybe young at heart listeners who are maybe in one type of practice considering the other and vice versa?
Sure. So I initially got interested in dermatology during my MD PhD years, and I developed psoriasis during my PhD years. And it took me like 6 weeks to get seen at Harvard Student Health. And so that gave me an opportunity to start looking at derm textbooks and try to self-diagnose what I had. And, having this second year medical student syndrome, I said, well, it's either psoriasis or mycosis fungoides. And then I finally got an appointment and it was confirmed as psoriasis. And then shortly thereafter, I got married and we went to our honeymoon on Maui and got some phototherapy there. But that was really enough to get me interested in dermatology. And I started looking at the dermatology literature and I said, there's a lot of impact to be done, with our, largest organ. Now, in terms of my transition to private practice, what I would say to young people starting out is I think it's a good idea to start in academics where you have the backup of more senior people and then try to form a niche and take it and hopefully you get the support that you need to with mentorship. Basically, I went into private practice and I turned 60 and I just wasn't happy anymore, writing grants all the time. And it became a little administrative heavy and, it kind of distracted from my original passion of trying to cure disease. And so I went into private practice. I've been happy. I've been in it for 14 months and I get satisfaction from getting good clinical results. So it's early detection of melanoma, treatment of skin cancers, nice cosmetic results when you remove a cyst, making people feel better with inflammatory skin diseases. So it's kind of like, at the end of the day, you know you've done some good, and you don't have the really long delayed gratification of, doing basic research. It's definitely a stage dependent thing. And, I think that you should be allowed to pursue happiness.
I think, Jack, that's a really key principle. And if I had to put a thread through all the great successful folks we had on the program, I think it's those two abilities to ask yourself, am I happy? And then honestly answer that question, because it requires that kind of honesty to say, what makes me happy? What would make me do better? And I will add, maybe part of it is making sure that what makes you happy is not a selfish endeavor. It's really what makes you happy is to be successful in what you wanted to do to begin with, which is to help other people. So certainly great. But, you made it sound like you only cut out cysts and treat diseases, but we know you do more than that. So I want to jump into the action here.
And Hadar, can I jump in? And I just want to add, Jack's point and his approach is not something that's unique only to him in terms of like starting, Jack, you starting off in academics and then going into private. I have to tell you, Peter Leo was an inspiration for me. He started in academics and he's in private and he's done pretty amazing things. And he's very, very academic at heart at the end of it all. Yeah. And then myself, I was in academics for 5 years, and now we have a private clinical trials unit, and we do amazing stuff in getting access to the underserved in our private clinical practice as well. And I think it really allows you to open up in a lot of ways and be more entrepreneurial. So I really appreciate you just stating what you just said. I think it's pretty inspirational for you to say it in such a way that allows people to see that you have choices beyond just what we're shown as med students.
Right. And I think it's also important that there's not this really stark dichotomy between doing research and doing pimple popping. I think there's this perception that's becoming, I think people are realizing it's no longer true, that you can make significant contributions within or outside of academics. And it's not an either or. It's not that, your work is as interesting in one place and boring in another place. But I think that there's opportunity in both places to make contributions.
Well said. Well said. Thank you, Raja, for adding that. And I think that's absolutely true. And it's something that at least I try to discuss with our residents as they kind of try to forge their way forward and create a career for themselves. It's true. It's not a dichotomy anymore. So you got to think of where can you make the most impact. So now, we spend a few minutes getting people really antsy about this. So let's get to the point. People want to know, what the heck does ant venom have to do with dermatology? So maybe you can give us the background we need to understand. What are we talking about when we say ant venom, and what does it have to do with dermatology?
All right. So that's a really good point. So I think that initially, if you think of ants, you think of them as pests. It's something that you don't want to step on. And your initial thought about what they have to do with dermatology is ant bites. And in the southern part of the United States, and unfortunately, the fire ant is endemic. It's actually an invasive species. It was brought over from Argentina into the South in the 1930s in ballast of ships, and has actually been a major agricultural pest. It forms these big mounds and causes destruction of cattle because they stumble onto these things. And so I initially got started with a chemist named Phil Bowen at the University of Georgia, and he had made analogs of ant venom that he thought that he could spray these small molecules onto ants, and that if the ants saw there was an excess of the small molecule, they would stop producing ant venom. And just for some background, ant venom contains two components. There's a peptide, which is what people become allergic to, and then there's a small molecule called solanopsin, and that's derived from the Latin name of the fire ant, which is Solanopsis invicta. And so Bill Bowen had synthesized these small molecules, and I was really interested in to figure out what they did. And so we looked at a whole series of these small molecules, and we showed that they block the growth of endothelial cells or blood vessel cells. And so we figured that could actually be anti-inflammatory or anti-tumor. And we showed that in an initial paper published in Blood, we showed that it had anti-angiogenic properties and inhibited certain signaling properties. And an interesting aside that I want to bring up with that Blood paper is that we initially submitted it to the Journal of Investigative Dermatology, where it was rejected. Then we submitted it to blood, which has a higher impact factor. And usually the process is you submit it to a journal with a lower impact factor. But I just thought that the findings were so significant that I submitted it to a journal with a higher impact factor, and it was published there.
I just want to say, it just goes to show that publishing with peer review has a lot of diversity in the responses that you get. So good for you.
That's for sure. And I remember I got a comment back, and they said, well, you should run it past this native English speaker for editing. And it's kind of like, well,
that's pretty funny. By the way, I've gotten reviews like that too, and we have a good chuckle about the whole thing.
Yeah. I won our school spelling bee like for 3 years in a row. So it's kind of like my English is pretty good.
But did you win the school grammar bee, Jack?
We didn't have one. But
So, Jack, I want to get back to this solanopsin because, and folks, mark that molecule. You'll be saying it a lot. And so let me get it right. So this thing basically can kill blood vessels, right? And we know that blood vessels are needed for neoplasms, for growths in the skin, be it benign or cancerous, but also inflammatory processes in the skin and elsewhere can create this. Now, when you kill blood vessels, though, a lot of times there's a risk of going too far and getting necrosis or getting bad outcomes. So how does it do that? How does it really kill just enough, or what is the mechanism by which those endothelial cells die?
So basically what we're finding, that's a really good question. And that led to our subsequent second study, which was done with Nicole Ward, who developed a mouse model of psoriasis. And we applied topical solanopsin to the mice that developed psoriasis. She is a keratinocyte driving type 2 model, which is one of the more established models of psoriasis. And we showed that when we applied that, we normalized many parameters of the skin. And so basically what we're finding is that solanopsin decreases the excess production of angiogenic cytokines. So it's not a direct inhibitor of angiogenesis that would cause necrosis, but it's an indirect inhibitor, and what it does is it prevents the excess production of cytokines and therefore normalizes the epithelium and normalizes the endothelium that's vascularizing the psoriasis. And so
Got it.
And so that's what makes it really elegant.
And so when you apply it to the skin, does it have any other benefits? So we understand the direct impact on blood vessels in the skin, which is, it's kind of a dermal blood vessel in the skin or in the dermis, but you're mentioning treating more of an epidermal disease where there's no blood vessels. Is there any effect there on psoriasis that you found, how it affects the skin cells up there in the epidermis?
Yeah, it decreases the production of IL-22 by keratinocytes, which decreases the thickness of the epidermis, and that's one of the cardinal features of psoriasis. The other really interesting thing is it decreases the production of IL-12, and IL-12 is produced by dendritic cells. And so IL-12 is anti-angiogenic, and we often associate it with being pro-inflammatory, but in many circumstances, it's anti-inflammatory. And so basically what it establishes a new paradigm that you can treat inflammatory diseases by inducing IL-12. And so what was really interesting is we found that to be true in both psoriasis and more recently in a mouse model of atopic dermatitis, where we also normalized the epidermis and had beneficial activity. And these experiments performed in totally different labs. Both labs found that topical solanopsin decreased the production of IL-12. And so that comes back to something that I used to wonder about when I was a resident. And during my residency years was before we had effective treatments for AIDS. And so you sometimes see these rip-roaring psoriasis or atopic dermatitis eruptions in patients with AIDS. And our understanding is that AIDS just depleted T cells. But this was really kind of strange to me because we know that T cells are involved in both psoriasis and atopic dermatitis. And so why should people with HIV have a lot of inflammatory skin disease? And as our understanding of immunology has expanded, we know that there's Th1 cells, and those are decreased by HIV infection. And if you decrease Th1, you'll either increase Th17 and get bad psoriasis, or increase Th2 and get bad atopic dermatitis. And so we found that our molecules in two different inflammatory skin diseases increase IL-12 as a common mechanism. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I love the way you think, Jack, and this kind of paradox in the immune system, which we kind of now understand a little better as more of a balance. But I always, in my mind, call it like our immune derangement syndrome. You know, one classic example I always give, never heard answer for that one, is a medical condition that dermatologists are very familiar with called sweet syndrome, in which you get a lot of neutrophils, a lot of immune cells in the skin. I mean, really, the skin is popping with them. Yet one of the most common association is a type of blood cancer in which you can barely find a single neutrophil in the blood, in the body, yet the 5 that are left, and I'm being exaggerating the numbers, but all honed to the skin. It's like, why would they do that? You barely have neutrophils. Why do they go to the skin? And it's really fascinating. And being able to make these observations and ask these questions is really at the core of innovation. So congratulations. Now, I want to ask you, and I think you may have alluded to it, but I just want to be clear. So now we took these ant venom molecule and we put it on skin of mice. Now, did they get this kind of reaction? Because I know I got a bite one time when I just moved to Florida, got a pretty bad bite by these ants, by these fire ants. That thing hurts. So do we get any side effects with that we can tell?
Not that we've seen. And I think that goes back to the component of ant venom has both a protein component and solanopsin component. And basically, I think that the protein component is most pathogenic. It pulls neutrophils to the skin, and the solanopsin plays a secondary role. And so this is not the equivalent of an ant bite in the fact that we're missing the protein part of the ant venom.
That's excellent. I have so many questions I want to ask. I'm going to try to tame myself here. So would you say now that you have this anti-blood vessel treatment, and you mentioned this as an immune modulator affecting interleukin 12 and vis-a-vis that affecting inflammatory skin disease. But could we use that also to destroy growth in the body? For example, simple stuff like, and you don't have to reveal, I don't know if you have any secret patents, feel free to ignore my question, but things like, I know patients are dying to get rid of cherry angiomas, these benign little bumps, red bumps on the skin that everybody gets as we age. And they're so annoying, but it's really not practical because we don't have really a cream to get rid of it. And so it's annoying. These kind of, or even other blood vessel tumors that kids get, benign stuff like that. Is there any application there?
I definitely think so. I would love to try it on cherry angiomas. And it's interesting that you mentioned cherry angiomas. They have mutations in GNAC, which is the same gene that's mutated in Sturge-Weber. And so it's kind of like it would be great to have something topical that would work for Sturge-Weber, and if it works, on cherry angiomas, it might work on Sturge-Weber. So, I think that's an excellent question. And I think other applications are common conditions like warts and actinic keratoses.
Right, because those are highly vascularized as well, basically any inflammatory process and growth. And so to our audience who's really getting fired up about this, when do you foresee this going to market? And this is getting to the innovator part, to the next step, which is actualizing your innovation. What is the pathway you're looking at to get this to market?
Well, so we've patented these derivatives, and basically what we're looking at to do at this point is to work with a company to try to get it into the clinic. And so basically, one of the discoveries that I made when looking at the structure of this molecule is it looks like ceramides, which are kind of the building blocks of the skin. But ceramides can be metabolized into something called sphingosine 1-phosphate, which is pro-inflammatory, but our compound cannot be metabolized into that. And so it does all the beneficial things that ceramides do without being converted into the pro-inflammatory sphingosine 1-phosphate. It may be that, there are a lot of creams say they contain ceramides, but the inflammatory conditions convert them into sphingosine 1-phosphate, but they can't do it with our compound because it can't be metabolized. But basically what we're trying to do is get companies interested in licensing these molecules. Emory owns the patents. I'm the inventor.
Got it.
And basically what what I'd like to do is, work with a company and, do the PK and toxicology, the things that are required for a investigational new drug, and work with a company. And I think this is really exciting because it works for inflammatory skin diseases like psoriasis and atopic dermatitis. So you've already got huge markets. It works through a novel mechanism of action. And we're basically looking to partner with pharma in order to bring it to the market.
Jack, how do you see this being used practically? Do you see this as something that would be injected? Would it be a topical? What avenue would you see this taking down the line?
So I would like to see it initially used topically. We've shown that it works well and that it gets to the epidermis quite nicely where it acts. So I would start with like mild to moderate psoriasis and atopic dermatitis. And also we've come up with synthetic ways, so it's really inexpensive to synthesize. And so one of the things that I would like to innovate also is to price this molecule or price this cream so that it could compete with topical steroids. And I think it's doable. Because if you look at a lot of other things that have come out, a lot of small molecules, they're really expensive. They require pre-authorizations. In my dream, I would price this competitively so as to get it on the formularies and compete with topical steroids. I mean, I'd like to compete with triamcinolone.
So, Jack, I have a question about that then, because if you're going to compete with topical steroids and you use the word formulary, you're going to have to take it through an FDA approval. Isn't the FDA approval pipeline the driver of the cost rather than the synthesis of the molecule itself in many cases? What's your take on that? And then maybe as an add-on question, why not just make it so that you could put it topically with a existing monographed product, like a monographed ingredient, like say colloidal oatmeal, and make it available OTC?
Yeah, so the derivative that we've made is synthetic, and so we think that it's going to require FDA approval, that it's probably not going to be able to go OTC, although if we could make the natural product in large quantities, that would certainly be a possibility. But this gives me the opportunity to talk about something that I don't quite understand in economics, so the FDA approval process does contribute to the cost of products, but basically the way pricing goes now is people are going to charge as much as the market allows. And basically sometimes that might not be it's not a volume play. And I think that a volume play ultimately is going to make more profit because, I always say, let's say if you price something at $1,000 a tube and you can't get it prescribed, 1,000 times 0 is 0. But if you can price it at $100 a tube and sell 1 million tubes, then obviously you're making more money. I think that, it's kind of like if you're going to price something at $1,000 a tube, that stuff has to do miracles. And most of the stuff that's priced that way doesn't do miracles. And third-party payers are going to balk at that. It's kind of like, when was the last time you prescribed a tube of Regranic? I mean, I've never prescribed it.
Yes, absolutely. And I have, and it is very expensive, but it does get covered under certain conditions. But I think what you're saying is very true. And you, Jack, are applying common sense into an area in medicine, which is medication coverage in the United States, which is unfortunately does not employ common sense. And all I have to say to our listeners is go to our last season finale episode talking about PBMs. And if you listen to that, you'll understand the kind of mountain that Jack and his company will have to climb. But Jack, this has been fascinating. I think we can talk forever about this. So many ideas. And this is what happens when you get a true Renaissance man, an innovator in our field. And it's been really a pleasure to talk to you this evening, but also pleasure to be mentored by you. And I still remember as a young applicant coming to Emory, looking through your lab and you showing me around was such a beautiful gesture for the student. I don't know, probably saw 100 students and still was very patient with me. And those little things go a long way. So appreciate your mentorship through the years, your leadership in dermatology. And I think you're just getting started. So we'll see you here soon when you go to market. Thank you.
And as they say, don't make a mountain out of a molehill. But you know what you've done, Jack? You're going to try to make a mountain out of an anthill. So I really think that's pretty cool.
We did it.
Good one.
The best pun of the year. Excellent.
Yeah.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. But these conversations are just way too good to end here. Wouldn't you agree, Raja?
Absolutely, Hadar. That's one of the main reasons I get so excited about our conference, the Integrative Dermatology Symposium. Every year, it's a chance for us to continue expanding our minds for what's possible in dermatology for our patients, and also to bring the latest clinical knowledge back to the clinic. And this year's theme has been long awaited. Do you want to spill the beans?
Oh, yes. You don't want to miss this one, folks. This year's theme is Nurturing Skin Resilience, the Science of Aging and Wellness. And it's happening from September 26th to the 29th, 2024.
Yes, and we'll cover topics from conventional medicine to traditional approaches, from inflammaging to exosomes, and from cosmeceuticals to women's health, and more.
The agenda lineup looks amazing. Not only the topics, but also the real-world case discussions, workshops, and networking events. No wonder we've expanded the IDS to 4 days. So much more to learn and do.
Plus, you can't go wrong at a brand new resort that just opened up this year at the Lowe's Arlington Hotel and Convention Center in Arlington, Texas.
Texas, here we come! And for our esthetician colleagues, please join us on Sunday for the Integrative Aesthetics track.
So come check out integrativedermatologysymposium.com for all the details. We hope to see you there.